Wichita Liberty TV, featuring host Bob Weeks. Local politics without the spin. Interviews with nationally respected economists. Hear directly from Kansas conservatives about what matters to you. It's individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. Wichita Liberty TV.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public affairs. We're broadcast on Great Plains Television, that's channel 26.1, also its companion website kgpt26.com. Some of you may know me from my blog, that's The Voice for Liberty at wichitaliberty.org. There the motto is individual liberty, limited government, free markets, and economic freedom in Wichita and Kansas. If you'd like to learn more about the issues covered today or to contact me, well, just please visit wichitaliberty.org. You can subscribe to the email newsletter, like The Voice for Liberty on Facebook, and follow me, Bob Weeks, on Twitter. Well, you may have noticed it's been about 2 months since the last new episode of Wichita Liberty TV. I took a little bit of time off to recover from surgery and navigate the holidays. Now, Wichita Liberty TV is back with a new season of episodes, keeping you informed about Kansas and Wichita government. And with me this week is someone who I hope will be a recurring co-host about every other week. He's been on Wichita Liberty TV before. He just finished 2 terms, that's 8 years, as a member of the Sedgwick County Commission, representing West Wichita and Western Sedgwick County. He is Karl Peterjohn. So, Karl, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV.
Bob, great to be here.
So, 8 years on the Sedgwick County Commission as an elected official. You were no novice to government before that. You spent about 16 years as executive director of the Kansas Taxpayers Network, advocating for Kansas taxpayers in Topeka, city council, courthouse, school districts, and so forth. But despite that experience and other experience you've had in government, what are some things that really surprised you once you were an actual elected official?
Well, I think the biggest surprise that would come out would be the difficulty that governments have with working with one another, and sometimes even working within one another. If the government organization is big enough, there are dysfunctionalities that exist because there's no price mechanism. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned market and economic driven. Bob, if there isn't a price and there's no way of determining what a price is, you have a misallocation if the price is set arbitrarily. Mm-hmm. And government does this, whether you want to talk about a minimum wage or a maximum price or any sort of situation. And so if government's offering a service for pay, might be entrance to a state park, might be your water rate for your city water bill, might be
grading the roads in the township, or blacktop on roads, or...
Well, in terms of see, that's where the political side of it is, because there's not an obvious cost. In the county, we had 600 miles of road, of which about 550 were paved, mm-hmm. and another 580 some bridges. And we were responsible for all those, maintaining and making sure that they were fully functional, so that you wouldn't drive over the bridge and the bridge would collapse.
Right.
So we, but the focus in terms of the surprise, Bob, would be the degree that governmental bodies struggle to work with one another.
That's interesting, and that has been in the news quite a bit the last couple of years or so with regard to the city of Wichita and the county commission in particular.
Well, there had been a issue raised by some folks at the city concerning allocation of the county's 1 cent sales tax. Mm-hmm. And this is very interesting because it's viewed as a city versus county or county versus city issue. Really, it isn't. The state of Kansas passed a state statute, Bob, that determines the allocation. And so you've got basically the state involved, which makes the dynamics significantly a little bit more like 3-dimensional chess instead of normal 2-sided chess.
So I think last year the city council did have lobbyists in Topeka, of course, and maybe on personal efforts too. The city council members were lobbying the legislature to say, hey, let's get this law changed so that more of the 1 cent sales tax in Sedgwick County comes to Wichita rather than the county itself or Derby or whatever else. That never went anywhere last year, did it?
No, it did not. But for your viewers out there, Bob, of the 1 cent that the county collects for that sales tax, 73 cents are going to the 20 municipalities that are inside the city of Wichita.
Mm-hmm.
Now the voters, when they approved this, Bob, the proposition that was given to the voters was that half the money would be used for property tax relief. The other half would be used for making Kellogg a freeway.
And how long ago was that, Carl?
Well, that was in a different century. That was back in the 1980s. That's what happens when you have a chronologically gifted guest who can take you back in time over 30 years.
No, I mean, I think if I live long enough to see Kellogg completed, you know, I'll have a long and healthful life, I think. So, Carl, we've got a lot more to talk about the county government, but let's take a moment off to take a break. This is Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, Karl Peterjohn. Karl, about a month ago in December, I think it was, our new county manager, although he's been there almost a year, so I don't know if new applies.
Well, a little over a year now.
Okay. Michael Scholes, he spoke at the Wichita Pachyderm Club, and he talked about a lot of management restructuring he had done at the county, and I was really surprised. I try to follow stuff like that, and I thought, I didn't read any of this in the Wichita Eagle newspaper, so could you describe a little bit about what he's done? Was this reported in the news media, or did I just sleep through it somehow?
Well, a lot of things fall through the crack, unfortunately, in this day and age, and so I really appreciate you asking the question, Bob, because we have a significant change in the way county services are being delivered. Mm-hmm. And the new county manager has really tried to restructure so that the support organizations that are helping the frontline entities, and when I say frontline, I mean we've got a county fire department, 911 is a county function,
EMS,
the EMS is a county function at this point. The health department, except for air quality, is entirely a county function. These are the frontline resources that people are provided. ComCare, the sheriff's office, you go down to the courthouse, whether it's the clerk, the register of deeds, the treasurer, the appraiser, those are all frontline services. But to keep the county operating, Bob, we've got to have a whole group of entities, and whether it's finance to handle accounts, whether it's payable or receivable, whether it's our IT function, handling all the computer-related and technology-related side of things, Bob, the support functions in terms of vehicles. Those are just several areas, and so what the manager did was to try and restructure so that those entities that support all of the above, like for instance the vehicle function, they take care of, they're deeply involved with the sheriff's vehicles, with public works, the variety of vehicles the public works has, which will be very important if we have the bad weather, winter weather that's been talked about. And so he had restructured the county and done it in such a way because in 2015, when we were in transition, the budget that had been presented to us had left off the public works function, which is a valuable part of public works, is absolutely vital, whether it's maintaining the roads or maintaining them in the short run in terms of like a weather event, but also maintaining them in terms of drivability.
Right.
But that function had been had not been included in the budget that had been given to us in the transition between the old manager and the new one, which was one of the issues where we'd had some budget problems, and it got a lot of attention, a lot of discussion, but that aspect of it didn't. That wasn't reported.
Well, it seems like you weren't exactly sorry to see the former manager leave, were you?
Well, he'd been here for almost a quarter of a century, and we were in a key transition. He was approaching 70 years of age and, well, very, very eligible to retire. I would point out, Bob, that a commissioner doesn't determine how well they get along with the manager or not. It's basically you've got to have 3 people on the commission who are willing to support the manager. 3 out of 5 being a majority. Yeah, 3 out of the 5 county commissioners being a majority. And of course in the smaller counties it might be 2 out of 3, and in Johnson County 4 out of 7.
Well, 25 years is a long time. I know, Karl, that you favor term limits on elected officials. When you ran for the commission, you pledged no more than 3 terms, and that would have been 12 years. But 25 years, I mean, I know a couple years Mike Pompeo spoke at the Pachyderm Club, and he's kind of in favor in some ways of term limits, maybe not, but people bring up the objection that, well, if we term limit legislators, that's just going to put more power on the bureaucrats and their staff. Mike Pompeo said, well, we need term limits on bureaucrats too.
Well, in terms of senior management, it's very unusual, frankly, to have a county manager who would be in one position or a city manager for that long and extended period of time.
Part of them is reason because a lot of them, especially if they're younger, they're ambitious. They want to move up to a larger city, larger county, whatever it is.
Larger budgets, larger paychecks, larger organizations.
More power.
Well, yes, but I think the important aspect of you're looking for continuity, but it's another symbol in terms of the lack of market signals, because you've got the same situation in the private sector. And of course, obviously, there's no term limits there. We've got industry leaders who created their own business.
Market competition.
Yeah, but you've got pricing factors that work into it, and you've got competition.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that insight to the county things, Karl.
But I mean, one of the things I point out, Bob, that I'm very proud of is we had 2 senior members of county staff who both reported directly to the county commission, the county manager and our attorney, the county counselor, who between them had between 55 and 60 years of county experience. They left. We managed to do the transition and bring new people on board, and I think we're stronger today than we have been in the past with Michael Scholes and Eric Yost in those 2 slots as manager and counselor.
It seems to be. Well, Karl, we need to take another break, and when we come back, we can't fail to talk about some national issues, so we'll turn to that in just a few moments. This is Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks with Karl Peterjohn. Before we do talk about the federal issues, it's an important time in our state right now because this week was the beginning of the new season of the Kansas Legislature. The governor gave his State of the State address on Tuesday, and then the budget was released. The governor's proposed budget report released on Wednesday, and a lot of people are predicting a lot of turmoil, I guess is the word. There are so many new legislators who run on an anti-Sam Brownback platform. They just didn't like the governor and stuff. We've got a lot of a gap between projected revenues and projected expenditures, so that's got to be reduced in some way. Plus, this is the year we're supposed to rewrite a new school finance formula. A lot of work. Yeah,
there's a lot of things happening in Topeka, and there are a lot of moving parts. I would add that you haven't mentioned the biggest 900-pound gorilla in the room, and that's the pending decision from the Kansas Supreme Court on school finance. And the financial problems the state have could be significantly expanded if that decision comes down the way many have speculated, that would dramatically, that they would mandate a big increase in spending. Although, let me throw it aside. Let's leave the court aside for a moment. You know, we are not alone. There are a number of the surrounding states around Kansas that are having fiscal problems
all across the country, really.
And we, among our immediate neighbors, I saw recently some data indicating that both Oklahoma and Nebraska were on a dollar amount basis and worse shape than we were. Now, of course, Oklahoma is slightly more populous and Nebraska slightly less. So, but they both, their financial gaps were larger. Now, we have a 2-year biennial budget now, and that may vary from some of these other states that are still operating on a 1-year budget.
But there is the numbers are kind of scary. For example, it's speculated that the Supreme Court may order another $400 or $500 million per year in school funding. To put that in context, a lot of people want to get rid of what's called the tax on pass-through, get rid of the exemption of the tax on pass-through business income, the LLC loophole or something like that. They think that will solve the state's budget problems, but it's thought that restoring that tax will generate only about $250 million, something in that neighborhood.
I've heard figures that are lower than that, between 100 and 150 million.
And yet we're just talking about maybe another 400 million in school finance. Between now and June 30th, we've got to somehow close about $350 million in gap between revenue and expenses. Seems like most people are looking to a revenue solution more than spending. Do you agree with that?
Unfortunately, I think that's the case, and if you can't control your spending growth, you're going to have to come up with additional revenue. I had a self-described moderate legislator shortly after I went up to Topeka as a Kansas Taxpayers Network, and I was the only one representing taxpayers up there. There were, lobbyists for all these various organizations, and I've tried to represent taxpayers, and this legislator kind of wanted to set me aside and say, well, look, the way we operate up here is every few years we have a fiscal crisis, and then we do something, it goes away, and then a few years later it comes back. Well, this has been happening for literally generations, Bob, and so we became a high tax point on the prairie. They talk about a three-legged stool for taxes. Well, there are a lot of states. Well, Kansas may be the only state in the country that has a statewide property tax left. Many states did, but back in the 20s and 30s when income and sales taxes appeared, the statewide property taxes were eliminated. Here in Kansas, we have a 21.5 mil statewide property tax. In terms of sales and income taxes, we have them. Well, there are 9 states without income taxes. Closest one to us is Texas, and there's 5 states without sales taxes.
Yeah, so they're just teetering on 2. But I've always thought that analogy to the three-legged stool is ridiculous. If liberals, progressive, could dream up a 4th method of taxation, they'd be talking about, oh, you got to have 4 legs on your stool, not just 3.
Well, I mean, whether we're talking about creating a new tax on vaping, a new tax on sodas, some municipalities around the country have enacted a surtax in addition to the existing sales tax.
Philadelphia, I think, just that started this month. And now the governor has proposed an extra $1 per pack on cigarettes tax as one thing. And, pity the poor smokers. I mean, I don't think smoking's a healthful activity, but still we shouldn't be punishing these people.
Well, actually, I'd pity the poor Kansas store owner who's near the Missouri-Kansas border. Yeah.
And, of course, Kansas has no problem with smoking if you're in a Kansas state-owned casino. That's, because they know that smoking's good for gambling, and they're willing to let that happen. But for you and me, we can't smoke hardly anywhere else.
Well,
not that we do.
We have a state monopoly on those state-owned
exactly
casinos.
Right.
We're one of I think, the only state in the country that the casinos are state-owned facilities.
It is. We are at the outlier of that. So, well, let's take another moment off, and we will get to those federal issues. This is Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. With me this week, Karl Peterjohn. So, the last couple months, of course, since the national election, the election of Donald Trump, there's been, just a whirlwind of news almost every day. Something that kind of touches us directly here in the 4th District of Kansas is that very early on, Donald Trump tapped our Congressman Mike Pompeo as his choice to be director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Hearings started today. This is Thursday. And who knows what will happen. I mean, I think it's quite unlikely that he will not be confirmed. So that brings up, well, you can't have an empty seat in Congress there. And congressmen are replaced with a special election.
It's in the Constitution.
Exactly. And so there's a lot of candidates already because it's kind of an unusual situation. There are delegates in the 4th Congressional District. These are like precinct committeemen, active people who have been
party activists and some elected official. In fact, you're talking to an alternate.
Right there.
I don't have a vote. I'm not one of the 126, but if enough of them don't show up, they may be reaching for alternates.
Yeah. Although, and then, so these 126 people will select the nominee for the Republican Party to run in a special election. Might happen around April 1st is probably a decent guess. We don't know for sure yet.
Well, state law, there's a problem between state and federal law on this,
yeah.
and it may be a little bit later than we think. It could be maybe May.
Well, it's all got to happen pretty quickly. And the Democrats will go through a similar thing, and we'll have 2 candidates there. So it's really a situation where there's a very low barrier to entry to being a candidate for a very high office. It's not like a primary where you're looking at having to raise $1 million or whatever. And plus, we know precisely who these 126 people are that are eligible to vote. So, you know, they're really crawling out of the woodwork, candidates.
Well, we've got 66 of those, 126 are from here in Sedgwick County. And you're exactly right. Anyone who's a registered Republican who lives in the state of Kansas. You do not actually have to live in the congressional district.
So
can become a candidate.
Yeah, notably Alan Cobb, who is of Wichita, but he's lived in Topeka for quite a while. Many people know him as the state director for Americans for Prosperity. Got that going in Kansas, and he's expressed interest in it. Even Tim Huelskamp of the 1st District may be interested too. But right here in Wichita, we've got a number of leading candidates, I think. It's probably no secret of my close relationship to Ron and Susan Estes, our state treasurer, and he seems to be in a pretty good, I'd say, the driver's seat so far, wouldn't you say? Or
well, I think he is in many ways the odds-on favorite since he has been on the ballot in the entire congressional district with his 2 runs for statewide office as state treasurer. He's well known, especially here in Sedgwick County, because he had been the county treasurer before he'd been elected to state office in 2010.
And kind of the good thing is he's kept his name out of the paper. And when you're a treasurer and you don't really make policy much, it's, you know, when your name gets in the paper, it's probably because of malfeasance more than something good you did.
Well, it's often easier to get your name in the paper when there's a problem than the other way around. But Ron has, and his wife Susan, who has been very active in party politics.
Americans for Prosperity.
And Americans for Prosperity. And so it's interesting in that sense because you mentioned Alan Cobb, and so there are a lot of people with ties to one another.
Alan hired Susan, I believe, to work at AFP. So as Kansas State Director, he still was. So yeah, and I think Ron Estes, although he's as state treasurer, he doesn't really vote on policy and things like that. He seems to have been a competent administrator. He's done a few good things, like I think reformed the unclaimed property way and so forth like that. So I think he'd be pretty good. But there were other people. Former Congressman Todd Tiahrt, I think, is.
Yes, former radio host Joseph Ashby.
Joseph Ashby, our friend of this show.
And there's a number of other names that have been thrown out. In fact, my name's been tossed out, although I'm not planning on running. I'll get that on the record here for you, Bob.
Okay,
make a little news that way.
Make a little news here today. So, you know, Mike Pompeo, I think, leaves some pretty big footprints behind to fill, because I really think he did a very good job as our congressman, passed some difficult legislation like the GMO bill that even President Obama signed. So, I think he'll do a good job as CIA director too.
Well, he's done an excellent job in part of the effort to try and get to the bottom of some of the scandals that have been occurring in Washington, and the House committees that had oversight, I believe he participated in, and was a very active interrogator of some of the folks appearing before the committee.
Well, it was he and Senator Tom Cotton who a couple years ago, or maybe just last year, went to Vienna and started poking around, and they found out all these documents relating to the Iran nuclear weapons deal that the U.S. government was not planning to release to the public. And really some groundbreaking work there.
That's a significant accomplishment.
Yeah. Well, Carl, we're out of time for today. It just runs by so fast. So thanks very much, Carl.
Oh.
We'll see you again in a couple weeks on Wichita Liberty TV. Thanks again. We'll be back.